Welcome to this lecture. It's about, of course, as you know, it's about the history of the land, like 2000 BCE till today. So we're going to talk about 4,000 years of history of the Israelite and Israel as a land. So, um, so let me give you an idea about the history and the timeline of this land. So this is the story of Israel as a people, as I said, and the history of the land. And when I say the land, of course, we're talking about the land of Israel and what's going on this land. So the stuff that goes back. So actually, I want you when I speak, I want you to pay attention. I want you to pay attention to me, to what I'm telling you, and also to pay attention on the slides. But don't lose me when you read the slides, because what I'm saying in the slide is not the same what I'm talking about, but it's explaining what I'm talking about. So try to focus on both together, please. Okay, so we'll talk about the history of Israel as a people and as the land, biblical and modern history until 1948, the creation of the state of Israel. And we're going to talk, of course, from the stuff that goes from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, and then what we know today is as Israel, as a country, because Israel somehow or some places was not a country, but it was a nation. So we will understand all of that during the lecture, and hopefully you understand what I'm telling you. And if you have questions, you can ask me at the end of the lecture. So we're gonna start the story, or our story goes back to the call of Abraham, which happened around 2100 BCE. So God says, Abraham, who's not from here, not from Israel, he's from a place east of here, or east of Israel. And God tells Abraham to leave your home and go to the land that I will show you. And Abraham comes here to this land. And so that's the start of this land before Abraham gets here. So before Abraham gets here, it was simply Canaanite. It was the land of the Canaanites. And Abraham comes from Ur. Ur today is the modern country is Iraq. So Abraham came from Iraq to the land of Israel after God called him and asked him to come here. Okay, so Abraham comes here or in Israel in about 2091. So his descendants, Abraham, give birth to Isaac. Isaac gives birth to Jacob, and Jacob gives birth to 12 sons. And those 12 sons, along with the rest of their wives, and we know that those 12 sons became the tribes of Israel. So the rest of their wives and children moved to Egypt with Joseph. So they left the Holy Land, or they left the land of Israel, and they left to Egypt with Joseph. So they leave the land, and the land still at this point under the Canaanite rule. Is that clear? So after the descendants of David were in Israel and give birth to all the sons and the tribes, they leave Egypt, they leave the land and go to Egypt. So it was Canaanite here. So they've been in Egypt for 430 years. So the Israelite now in Egypt for 430 years. Now, after they are in Egypt, God leads them out of Egypt with Moses, and then through Joshua, they come back into the land, and that's the conquest of the land. So 430 years in Egypt, Moses led them back, Moses died, and Joshua led them to enter the promised land. And of course, there's some disagreement about the dating, but we put that in 1400 BCE, 1450 BCE. It's not very important when it happened exactly, but we understand that Joshua led them at that time to enter to the promised land. So Joshua is the children of Israel coming back into this land from Egypt and coming back, taking control of the land. And so they've been in control of this land from the 1400 BCE for some time. So now they are controlling the Israelites back and they are controlling the land. So after the conquest, that's sort of the next major era, we have the judges era. So Israel is under the judges after Moses and Joshua. Now it's under the judges. So we looked at Deborah. So judges is Deborah, Gideon, Samson, and that's the next. But then the major thing that happens next is this. We have a monarchy, and so after the period of the judges, we have the monarchy period or the king's period. So the Israelite decides that they want a king. So we have Saul, the first king, then we have David, the second king, and Solomon, the third king. So that's what we would call the period of the monarchy. Okay, so Israel is still in this land and ruled, and they are being ruled by a king. So after Solomon, his son Rehoboam ruled, and there was a civil war or split between the 10 tribes in the north and the 2 tribes in the south. So that's what we call the divided monarchy. So it's in the book of Kings and Chronicles. We have a lot that is tracking kings of Israel and kings of Judah. So 10 tribes in the north chooses the name Israel, as you can see on the slide. Those 10 tribes with Jorban, they are in Israel. They called it Israel. And the 2 tribes in the south, they name it Judah. Only 2 tribes were under Judah or in Judah. Judah is the tribe from which David, Josiah, Hezekiah, and Jesus come from. We all know that and we all agree on that. So they stick with Davidic king, and Benjamin just kind of sticks with them. So Judah and Benjamin sticks with the kingdom Judah. The other 10 tribes are like, we don't want Rehoboam anymore. They don't like Rehoboam in the north because of all what he did. We all know the story from the Bible that he built a high place and he used to appoint the high priest and worship the false god. So they said, we don't want Rehoboam anymore. So everybody, but Judah basically leaves the kingship and they create their own king with a guy named Jeroboam. Okay? So Saul, David, and Solomon are the only 3 kings that the 10 tribes recognize because they were the kings of the 2. Oh, there was no 2 kingdoms, it was 1 kingdom and 12 tribes under them, but after Solomon, it was divided. So only the 3 first kings were under, or the 12 tribes were under them. So now the kingdom is divided, and that's against the will of God, of course, or the heart of God. So what happens next? We have the Assyrian invasion. We're still talking about the biblical stories. So the Assyrians are an empire that comes into the land, and they totally defeated the 10 tribes in the north, if you remember the north, Jerba. They defeated them, they destroyed them, and a lot of people from the 10 tribes, they came as a refugee to Judah, to Jerusalem, sorry. And so Israel is defeated and they are taken into captivity and sort of dispersed, and so they don't exist as a nation anymore. Please pay attention for this. They are not a nation anymore. So, okay, remember we divided into two nations. Then the nation in the north gets defeated, taken into captivity, and dispersed. So Assyria tries to invade Judah, but God miraculously resecured Judah during the time of King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. We can see till today, if you come to Israel, if you visit Jerusalem, you see the evidence of the Assyrian invasion in Jerusalem and how God miraculously put that down. About 185 people from the invasion, from invading Assyrian army. In fact, it is the most assisted event in history, means we have all sorts of stuff that tells us about this event. A lot of books talk about this event, and as I said, if you come to Jerusalem, you will see the evidence of the siege that the Assyrians set against the wall of Jerusalem, and we still can see the wall that King Hezekiah built 1,700 years ago. So as I said, we have the stuff from Egypt that talks about it. We have the stuff from Syria. We got stuff from the Bible, of course, and we got stuff from the Roman history. So the Egyptians think there was some sort of plague of mice, but somehow everybody knows that, or there was an incredible army that was somehow surrounding Jerusalem and didn't conquer Jerusalem. The Bible tells us it was God who saved them. But even secular historians cannot figure out what happened to the army, but secular historians probably don't believe like us as a believer. You can see from the slide what happened, and we can see the angel like it's illustration to what happened, that God helped the Israelite or Judah to stay alive. So so God helped them, and trust me, I tell you this from my perspective, that if God did not help the Israelite or the Judah tribes, trust me, today there was no Israel, and you will not get the opportunity to come to Jerusalem and visit Israel. So it's a miracle. Anyways, so God protected Judah, as I said, for longer, and because God made a promise that the ultimate king of Israel, Jesus, would come from the line of Judah. The line had to be protected by God. So although in this invasion they lose the Ark of Covenant for the first time, sort of during the conquest, It does, however, reappear and comes back into the temple. But after the temple is destroyed, the ark sort of disappeared. But we, as a believer, we believe that the ark is in heaven, and in Revelation 8, the ark is revealed, but nobody knows where the ark went. So after after this, we have the period of the Babylonians. So Judah still around until a guy named Nebuchadnezzar comes from Babylon, and he invaded the nation of Judah and takes them into captivity. So this is the book of Daniel and the book of Esther. Judah goes into captivity for 70 years, meaning that they leave the land and they go to Babylon. So now the Israelites are not again in the land of Israel, they are in Babylon. And so Babylon in charge of what's happening in Israel or the land of Israel. Babylon gets conquered after that by Persia, and so various empires are in charge of what happens here. So then we get to the return. These are the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. After the 70 years are over, people like Ezra and Nehemiah lead the Israelites back into this land. And they rebuild the temple and what is called today the second, or not today, back then, it's called the second temple period. And so from that point on, we have what's called the second period, but they rebuilt the temple and rededicated it, and they are back in the land, but they are still under a foreign power. So after the return, Ezra and Nehemiah and built the second temple, then we really don't have any more stuff in the Old Testament. Like I'm trying to say, like the Old Testament is sort of done by this point. Okay? So there is still more happening in the history. So after Babylon comes Persia as empire. The Persians are then defeated by the Greek. I forgot to talk about this, that the Israelites came back during the Persian period by King Cyrus, who allowed them to come back to this land and rebuild the temple. But as I said, there's still more happening in the history. So after Babylon comes Persia as an empire, and the Persians are then defeated by the Greek. You've probably heard about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great sort of conquered the known world. Then he dies. He only lived like 4 years after the conquest of Israel. So he has no heirs, and his kingdom was divided into 4 parts, Alexander's kingdom. So Daniel prophesied about the big event that happens, that this guy from the Seleucid Empire, his name is a little bit difficult, Antiochus, and in the year 167 BCE, on his way back from a defeat in a battle in Egypt, he lost the battle in Egypt. He comes back to Israel, and during his coming back through the Holyland, he decided to vent his rage on the Jewish people that are here. He's revenging from them, although it wasn't their fault that he lost the battle in Egypt. So he goes to the temple and desecrates the temple, and he sets up false worship and false sacrifices, of course. And this is what the book of Daniel prophesies, which is known as the abomination that causes desolation. So after Jesus references that in the gospel, he talks about the abomination and cause of desolations. So this is like a horrifically offending event for the Jewish people. So he made everything against the Jewish people and purified the temple. So, of course, the Jews were not happy, and we had a group of Jews that are called the Maccabees. So it's during the Maccabean or during the Maccabean revolt. Of course, they revolted against them as a group of priests and leaders in Israel, stage a revolt, and it's called the Maccabean revolt. And so the book of Maccabees are in the Apocrypha. You know what's Apocrypha meaning? They are in the Catholic Bible, talks about it. They are not sort of the Protestant Bible, and they told the story of the Maccabean revolt. So it's during the Maccabean revolt that we have the Feast of Tabernacles, which they are not allowed to celebrate, and it gets moved and has to be celebrated late. And that's one of the revenge, of course, not to let them celebrate on the time of the tabernacle feast. So in the year 164 BC, and ended up becoming Hanukkah. So this is where the Hanukkah comes from. Sorry, you see the Hanukkah, by the way, like the menorah on the slides on the left. That's the Hanukkah. So now comes Hanukkah, because miraculously, what is Hanukkah? According to the book of Matthew for the Maccabees, they don't run out of oil and are able to keep the menorah lit for 8 days. So the oil that they found was enough for one day, but miraculously, God made it lit for 8 days. That's why the menorah is eight, and the menorah is seven, and the Hanukkah is 8 candles. And it's the period of the Maccabean rule here in the land. And during this time, Greece, Alexander the Great, of course, who started it, and sort of the Greek Empire gives way to the Roman Empire. So a guy named Pompey ends up coming to Israel and establishes sort of a rule in this part of the world, of course, in Israel and the Middle East, Mediterranean and Jordan River. And so Rome is taking over the whole empire. But Pompey and Julius Caesar, they don't actually want to rule themselves. And so they pick what they would call sort of a puppet king, someone who would rule on their behalf, and they choose a guy through the line or the lineage who ends up being Adonai, which means he's from Edom. He's not Israelite, but his son and grandson end up being Herod the Great. So the king of the Jews is not Jews. So at this point, Rome is in charge of the land of Israel, but it's not being administrated directly by Rome. It's called a protectorate because basically Rome is letting Herod rule. Like, if you think about it today, if you think about Scotland and Ireland, they are all kingdom under the United Kingdom, but ruled by the British. So this is what really was going on at that time. Just an example. So the land was under Rome rule, but Herod was the one who was in charge of what's going on in Israel. When Herod the Great dies, he dies just after Jesus is born, maybe 2 years after. So this is how we date Jesus' birth, because Herod is alive when Jesus is born, because other orders, and he orders the killing of the all babies in Bethlehem, but we think that Herod died about 4 BCE. So Jesus was born around that time when Herod died. His territory was divided out to his sons. So Herod Archelaus ends up ruling in this area or in Jerusalem. That's sort of in Jerusalem. And then we had Herod Antipas, Herod Philippi in the north, so in the Galilee and in the capitalist regions. So we've got three kids who are ruling three different areas. Two of them, or two kids, turn on the third kid, and so they report to Archelaus, or the two kids report Archelaus to Rome, and that's he is an unfit ruler. So Herod Archelaus is removed, and what happens from that point on is that a partition of his land becomes Rome province. So what that means is Jerusalem and Judea are ruled directly by Rome. Okay, so there are still parts of Galilee that will be removed by Herods, but that's sort of the center. The part that was Archelaus is now ruled directly by Rome. So instead of a puppet king like Herod, Rome sends a governor, Pontius Pilate. So Pontius Pilate is the governor now, replacing Archelaus. Later will be Photius and then Felix. So they are running directly over Jerusalem and Judea from Caesarea. So they come here to Caesarea and they are directly administrating what's going on from Caesarea. This is why, or when it's time of Jesus' crucifixion, the Jews have to go to Pontius Pilate to ask for Jesus to be crucified because they don't have the right for capital punishment, death. And you will also notice that when they find out that Jesus is from Galilee, Pontius Pilate finds out that this is an opportunity to get on well with Herod that rules in that area. And so there is like a connection between the two of them. So, so some regions of Israel are still ruled by the Herods under the authority of Rome, but Jerusalem and Judea are directly by Rome, with Rome governor or Roman governor who reports to Rome directly. So when when the Jews reject Jesus, Jesus makes a prophecy that Rome is going to come in and destroy Israel, meaning that the Israelites are living in this land under Roman rule, but a temple, and they still have some ability to worship and to do certain things because of their rejection of Jesus, according to Jesus, the Romans are going to come and destroy the temple that happens in the year 70. So the temple is destroyed, and let's see what happens after that. And so the Romans comes into Israel, and they decide that they tried of the Jewish people, and they are finally going just expel them from the area. So they are expelled again from Jerusalem. So this is the story of the Masada, of course, if you know the story of Masada. So this is what we call the Roman expulsion. So from AD 70 until 1948, there is no real sense of Jewish people having any sort of control or influence in the land. Remain totally kicking them out, but not all the exterminated. A guy named Hadrian, who is emperor in the 100 CE, now we are in the CE, he renames the land, which you sort of have that power for him, and he wants to rename it after a more ancient name that it had before, Israel, because he's trying to sort of appeal to history, but he doesn't quite get the name Philistines right. And so he ends up calling it Palestine. So the name of Palestine really came from Hadrian. So it wasn't really an Arabic name today, Palestine. And it's not the same people, the Palestinians today. Why he called it Palestine or Philistines? According to the Philistines in the Bible, or not according, like, refer to the Philistines in the Bible, that they were enemies with the Jews. So, of course, he wants to tease or bug the Jews. He called it Philistines or Palestine or Palestine, which is sort of corrupted from or of the Philistines, of course. So from that point on, there are no Jew or Jewish people exercising any sort of control over society in this land. So Romans in charge, the sort of Roman explosion happens around 325 AD. A Roman emperor, Constantine, becomes or became a Christian. And so now what was the Roman Empire is now a Christian. Roman Empire is Christian now. So in the West, it's sort of known as a Roman or as Rome, and then it is in the East, it's known as more as Byzantine, because Constantinople or Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople from Rome to Constantinople, which is today it's Turkey, of course, which become modern day Istanbul, and this is or this side of the empire is Istanbul, which is where Israel is called as part of the Byzantine Empire. So from that point on, you basically have Rome, Byzantine Christian, who are ruling in this land. So the Romans, they're still here, they did not leave. Yes, the Romans kicked out the Jews from Jerusalem. At 325, Constantine became Christians, and probably he was more soft with the Jews, and who became Christians, and it became the official religion for the Roman Empire. So sort of from the 300s of the people ruling here, Byzantine Christians, as I said, then around the 600 is the rise of Islam. So no more Romans or Byzantine in Israel. The rise of Islam, and Islam starts in Saudi Arabia and move towards this part of the land, conquering people as they go. And so after the Byzantines, you get the siege of Jerusalem in AD 637. Then this land under Muslims' influence, it continues after Muslim influence until you get a Pope, a Pope Innocent III. So the Byzantine Empire is in the east, or the west side of Roman Empire has become Catholic or Roman Catholic, and the Pope or the Bishop of Rome decides that they should have Jerusalem back, like there is no reason why Jerusalem is under or ruled by Muslims. And so he promises people sort of easy access into heaven and sort of repentance for their sins, penance for their sins, if they will go on crusades to go and liberate Jerusalem, especially from the hands of infidels. So this is the period of the Crusaders, and there are multi Crusaders that come back from West Europe into Israel. So people like Richard, Lionheart, and in 1099 they actually captured Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is then back under sort of Christian rule, but from Western Rome point of view. That's why in Caesarea there are Crusader rules. If you come to Caesarea, you will see the remnants of the Crusaders. So there is an architecture during the Crusader period, also in the land, not only in Caesarea and also Jerusalem, because there were Western Europes who would come here and who had taken control of Jerusalem. So after the Crusaders, the Muslims come back. Many Muslim periods come even before the Ottomans. So Muslim takes over, but next major event is that an Ottoman named Sultan Sulaiman comes to Jerusalem. Ottoman Empire is modern day Turkey, so the Ottomans are the Turks, and they are willingly give Jerusalem over to the Sultan, also from the Muslims, from Salah ad-Din we had before, and the what we call them, the Mamluks. So the Ottoman takes over from the Mamluks, but we're not going to talk about them, not much history, but we'll talk about the Ottomans because more history, and they stayed for 100 years. So most of famous Muslim who won back Jerusalem is Salah ad-Din. So he come into the land, he conquered Jerusalem, and like Jerusalem became Muslim. But it was then handed to the Sultan because the Ottomans were so powerful and there was no reason for a fight among Muslims and Muslims. So they handed to the Ottomans, and they were also Muslims, of course, the Ottomans. So the Ottomans ruled for 400 years. So the old city, if you've been there, the old city walls of Jerusalem are from this era. He donated those walls have, as a gift for giving him Jerusalem, and he stayed under Ottoman rule until World War One. In World War One, The Ottomans ended up on losing side of the Germans, or side with the Germans, sorry, and the Russians. Then on the other side, you had France and America on winning side. So the Ottomans, Russia, Germany lost to America and England and France. So then the Ottoman lost and handed to give up Israel, and Britain and France divided up the Middle East. So the ones further in the north went to France, like Lebanon and Syria, and the ones further south, Israel and Jordan, went to Britain. So Israel, from 1918 or 1917 after World War I until 1948 was under the British control. And during this time, there is a guy named Arthur Balfour. You can read what he said. The foreign minister of England mentions the idea that they should allow the Jewish people to have their own country again. So after 2000 years, after AD 70, there has not been a Jewish state, as I said before or earlier, in Israel at, at all, even until the British come along. Now, a guy named, and of course he was before Balfour, a guy named Theodor Herzl, who is part of the Zionist movement. Actually, he established it, who were arguing that they deserve to have a place in the Middle East. They should have their own state, their own country. And some people in America and Britain wanted this to happen also because they were reading the stuff about the end of times and wanted the people to go their own land and to hurry up Jesus' return. Of course, because politicians, they were arrogant and they thought that they could do what they wanted. Then after World War II, especially because of the Holocaust, there was a worldwide movement of empathy for Jewish people. And so in 1948, England gave up control of the land, which is now the modern new state of Israel. So in 1948, a new Israeli government took charge, and it's the first president, or the first actually prime minister, was a guy named David Ben-Gurion, as you can see in the slide. David Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister, and he declared the creation of the state of Israel, and they would come back into there, but people have made a mess of it, and it wasn't exactly the way they were supposed to come back. But now it's confusing political situation. But at the end, they announced the declaration. They announced the creation of the state of Israel. And this is how God kept his promises for more than 2,000 years for the Israelites and for the Jewish people to come back to the promised land. So now we have Israel, the new state that still exists until today.